Every single summer, the great people of the state of Missouri, actually it's pronounced Missoura, they flock by the thousands to several of the smaller rivers and larger streams throughout the state to engage in an activity called floating. Now, to most native Missourians, it's like a birthright for them. It's like even if you don't like baseball, like at all, it's just assumed that you will still worship the St. Louis Cardinals nonetheless. It's a strange phenomenon. One summer day, you will suddenly find yourself sitting in the bleachers at a Cardinals game, and you will think to yourself, wait a minute, it's freaking hot, and I hate watching baseball. What am I even doing here? But you can't actually bring yourself to get up and to leave because you feel like you will sort of like break some sort of supernatural law if you leave the game early. It's also assumed that every Missourian loves pimento cheese or Emo's pizza. Tell a Missourian that Emo's pizza tastes like cardboard with crappy cheese sprinkled on top, and they will ask you if you have ever considered moving to the great state of Illinois. In the same way, if you don't go on at least one float trip a year, preferably more, people will begin to wonder what's seriously wrong with you. Oh, he must be from Illinois. Bless his heart. That explains it. And what they do is they either purchase or rent inner tubes, and they gingerly float along down these calm rivers and streams on what's basically a giant inflatable donut. And many, if not most, they even decide to make a camping trip out of it, a whole weekend excursion. So they haul along tents and food and all of that good stuff. But the most crucial element of it all, the cornerstone of the whole floating experience, of course, is beer. Lots and lots and lots of cheap beer. And the attitude is the more cheap beer you drink and bring, the more epic your float trip is obviously going to be. And this is precisely the difference between a float trip and a river rafting trip. In rafting, there are rapids and you are moving pretty quickly downstream. You actually have to paddle. You have to exert yourself somewhat or oftentimes a lot. Floating, however, this is not the case. There are no rapids. You don't even have to paddle. You can have a beer in each hand if you want. And the whole point of the whole thing is about not exerting yourself at all. So there's little to no chance that you will spill or drop any of your beer, your PBR, into the river at any point. There's a subpar parable in here somewhere. Let's see if we can find it. The kingdom of heaven is like a redneck on a float trip. This is not to say that every person who goes on a float trip is a redneck. No, actually, maybe I am saying that. The kingdom of heaven is like a person on a float trip. All they have to do is sip their Bud Light and let the gentle stream carry them along. But to what else can we compare the kingdom of heaven to? What else can we liken it to? The kingdom of heaven is like going to the chiropractor. You can simply let yourself rest in her hands. She will adjust you, and everything that needs to be popped back into place will get popped back into place with ease. But if you tense up because you anticipate the pop, there's a chance that you might get hurt. So the key is to let yourself rest in her hands, to not worry about that impending pop. In so many ways, faith is about simply letting yourself float downstream, to use a well-worn-out cliche. But something that most people don't get, I think, is that it's also about letting go of all anticipation. Faith is about trying to not figure out where it is one is going. And the more we resist God's healing touch, the more prone we are to damaging ourselves. In our gospel reading for today, the story picks up where that famous story where Jesus fed the 5,000, where it leaves off. Jesus leaves the field where the people are fed, and he makes his way to Capernaum. Now, a remnant from that group of the 5,000, they realize that Jesus has left, and they go to seek him out, to find him. And once they finally find him, He says that the only reason why they are there is because he fed them the day before. In other words, they're hungry and they're looking for another free meal. Then Jesus tells them that it's more important to work for the food that endures for eternal life than it is to work for physical food that spoils and rots and perishes. In other words, he tells these people that they are missing the whole point of what he's about. Not that there's anything wrong with ensuring that people don't go hungry and feeding them. It's just that Jesus is here to offer us so much more. He did not come just to satiate grumbling stomachs, but he came to heal and to nourish the whole person, to bring health and vitality into all life. So the people ask him, what then must we do to perform these works of God? They want to know how to work for the food that endures for eternal life. And Jesus responds by saying that the work of God is this. It's to believe in the one whom God has sent. The work is faith. The work is no work at all. The work is the realization that one no longer has to work, and that a relationship with God is actually not about work, about what one does or does not do. The work of God is about adopting a posture of acceptance, accepting that accepting the relationship just as it is, not as we want it to be. And the work of God is about simply letting Jesus be who Jesus is already to us. And this is key. The work of God is to just let yourself float downstream and to trust that even though you don't know where it is that this stream is going to lead you in the end, God does. But then comes the part of this story that tends to really confuse people who read it or who hear it read. The crowd asks, so what sign are you going to give to us that we can believe you? What work will you perform, Jesus? And many folks who read this part of this story, they say to themselves like, hey, wait a minute. Jesus just performed a sign in front of all of you. He just fed 5,000 people. You were a part of that crowd. Like, how much more of a sign do you need? But it's the next thing that the crowd says that holds the key to clearing up all of the confusion. They say that our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. And what they're referencing here, of course, is that ancient story from Exodus where God rained down bread from heaven on the Hebrew people to eat every day so that they could survive in the wilderness. So it's not as though this crowd didn't believe in the sign that they all clearly witnessed the day before at the feeding of the 5,000. Their point is that Moses fed the people in the wilderness every day and not just on one occasion. So what they're saying is, Jesus, feed us just like Moses fed the people in the wilderness. Feed us more every day. They want Jesus to do the same thing, to repeat the past here. And they're even anticipating that this is exactly what he's going to do, which is why they are there to begin with. So in essence, they believe that they're going to relive this whole extraordinary event from the past with Jesus. Now notice how this conversation has played out so far. Jesus tells this crowd that the work of God is to simply believe him, to simply trust him. But the people, they think they're doing this. They basically respond by saying, right, yeah, and that's what we're doing. Clearly, you're going to do for us what Moses did for our ancestors. We believe that this is exactly what you're going to do. We have the faith that this is what you're going to do for us. Their necks are in the chiropractor's hands. But because they are anticipating the pop, they have stiffened their necks, and they're unintentionally fighting against their own healing. Specifically, they're shaping their anticipation of their future with God off of their past experiences of God, or at least the people's past experiences of God. And their faith is limited to the confines of a past experience. But Jesus is saying that he wants to do way, way more than Moses ever did, but the people can never quite understand what he's getting at because they've become accustomed to believing that God is limited to acting in a certain way or certain ways. For them, faith is about repeating past experiences with God. It's not about venturing into uncharted territories with God. And it's even their last line. Their last line reveals just how much they have missed the point entirely. Jesus tells them that the true bread is not something that he can give. The true bread is something that he is. But they respond by saying, "Sir, give us this bread always." But the thing is, like, they already have it. It's standing there right in front of them, looking them in the eyes, talking with them. To ask for the gift implies that they don't already have it to begin with. And their faith is so confined to a previous experience of God that they can't break out of that narrative long enough to see this new experience of God standing right there before their very eyes. One of the great English mystics from the 14th century, he once said that even if Jesus were to fully appear to you in all of his heavenly glory while you're praying, you should carry on as if nothing at all had happened after this vision has ended. Why? Because when we dwell too much on our past experiences of the divine, it actually blinds us from our present experience of the divine. The reason why so many people these days feel off spiritually, I believe, is because they're trying to relive the past while God is trying to open up for them a new future, to do something different. God is trying to teach them that all they need to do is let the stream carry them along to new and beautiful places. But they're too busy swimming upstream, trying to get back to that one beautiful spot that they stopped at that one time that they really enjoyed. And that beautiful spot, yes, it may have been magnificent and life-changing, but it will always pale in comparison to the next spot on the journey. My friends, the work of God is to simply believe. Faith, belief, it's about resting in God, resting in God's resting in you. Faith is not about believing that God will treat us today in the same way that God treated us yesterday. Faith is the belief that our today with God will always be better than our yesterday with God. And even more, our tomorrow with God will be even better than our today with God. But the moment that we ask God to repeat the past, we're no longer acting out of faith. The moment we ask God to repeat the past, we fail to do the only thing that God is asking us to do, to trust, to believe. Faith is not about trying to control what God does for us. Faith is about relinquishing all of the control, detaching from it all. It's about realizing that it's better to let the stream carry you along into a better tomorrow than it ever is to try to swim upstream to get back to that place you were at yesterday. Besides, the more you try to swim upstream, the greater of the risk that you will drop your beer into the river, right? There's a metaphor in there somewhere, I am quite certain, but I'll let you figure that one out. If you have the ears to hear, then hear. My friends, God does not put any conditions on his love for us. It would be unwise for us to put any conditions on our faith in him. Don't ask for the manna of yesterday when the bread of heaven is always with you.